Hello and welcome to coverage of Grand Prix Denver. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Reed Duke, and we're getting set here for round number 2 where we've got, that's right, Conley Woods. Welcome back, Conley. This is a home GP for Conley now. He lives here in Denver, and he showed up with a nice one. He's actually been testing this on his stream for 3 weeks plus, Reed. He's playing Mono Black Eldrazi. Yeah, he's playing against Brock Jones, who's playing, well, it has to be said, it's one of the pillars of the format at this point, White-Blue Flash.
Yeah, Brock Jones playing White-Blue Flash, a deck we definitely expected to see, against Conley Woods playing a deck that we did not so much expect to see.
Yeah.
Mono Black Eldrazi.
Exactly. He's going to kick things off with Transgress the Mind here. This is a key piece of the puzzle for Conley. He explained to us that the ability to not only take cards out of his opponent's hands, but also just have the knowledge, specifically for this deck here, Reed, the White-Blue Flash deck, it really kind of deals on the fact that you don't know what it's going to do, and it can do so many things on your turn that would change your plays if you did, that he feels like he gets a big advantage from cards like Transgress the Mind.
Yeah, and you're seeing right now, especially he's seeing Revolutionary Rebuff, which is a very specific situational counterspell, and when you have the knowledge that your opponent has something like that, it makes it very easy to either play around directly or just sculpt your game in a way that it's going to minimize the damage.
And he ended up taking a Gideon there as well, so that's another long-term threat that he won't have to deal with now. So Conley off to a decent start here.
Yeah, relevantly exiling the Gideon, and when you spoke to him earlier, he pointed out his favorite 1-2 punch in the deck, which is turn 2 Transgress the Mind, turn 3 Wasteland Strangler. Let's see if he has it here.
Absolutely. He would love to have a Wasteland Strangler on his turn here to take out that Selfless Spirit that just hit the battlefield for Brock Jones. He's going to use that to crew up his Smuggler's Copter, get in for 3 damage, and even get a loot out of the deal. So a nice start here for Brock. Conley's also packing Smuggler's Copters of his own. He says it's not a key piece of the puzzle. There it is,
There
Reed.
it is. All right.
The old 2-3 punch, exile, kill, sacrifice it all you want. Nobody cares. The way it goes.
So that worked out perfectly. The dynamic of Smuggler's Copter is that you're forced to play a creature, almost always one that's vulnerable to Wasteland Strangler, on your 3rd turn, sets it up perfectly for Conley. And despite him being on the draw against Brock Jones with a pretty good hand, turn 2 Copter, turn 3 creature, Conley has managed to sort of hijack the initiative here, and he's totally stabilized the board. But things still going pretty well for Brock. He's got a follow-up creature, gets to keep the
Copter in the sky.
Keep the Copter in the sky, keep the new cards flowing. You're probably going to see him discard either an extra land, maybe the Revolutionary Rebuff, now that the cat's out of the bag with that one. Actually decides to keep the rebuff to protect himself from some of Conley's powerful 4-drops. Discard Stasis Snare instead.
Now, I don't think it's super relevant, Reed, but should the Gideon be in Brock's graveyard after the Wasteland Strangler? What did I miss there?
Maybe yes, maybe no. There's a interesting thing about Wasteland Strangler, which is that you target the creature before you decide whether or not to use the ability. So if Brock Jones said, I'm going to respond by sacrificing the Selfless Spirit, then Conley doesn't even have to bother putting the card back in the graveyard. He can save it for another Wasteland Strangler later.
Must be what happened here.
Yeah, could be.
All right, we see, one of the more powerful cards, of course, Spell Queller out of the White-Blue Flash deck list here, as Conley went for a Transgress the Mind, and, well,
yeah, and that
ended up getting his Transgress exiled rather than whatever he wanted to target with it.
Yeah, it was almost as inconvenient as possible for Conley there, because he did know about the Revolutionary Rebuff, perhaps chose to cast a less expensive spell to play around it, but got nabbed by the Spell Queller.
Well, they always have the top of their deck.
Yeah, and especially with Smuggler's Copter providing an extra loot every single turn, it's going to almost erase the information that the discard spell gave Conley over the course of a few turns.
Conley's going to kick things off by attacking with his Wasteland Strangler. He is significantly behind in the race here. You can see he's facing down 5 power in the air just as the board sits on its own. And he's already down to 9 life here, Reed. Just 2-turn clock. And that's without Brock doing anything else.
Yeah, and one of the main strengths of the blue-white flash deck in a matchup like this is that so many of its creatures have flying. The big ground blockers of the Eldrazi deck not necessarily able to help Conley stabilize.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Another Spell Queller for brock jones.
Again,
Gross.
Conley lines it up in a way where the Revolutionary rebuff's not going to get him, but again, the Spell Queller is the perfect answer.
How savage.
However, here's a situation that you often see with the blue-white flash deck, which is that they almost build themselves a house of cards with the Spell Quellers, and if Conley can remove the one, freeing up the second removal spell, get all the Spell Quellers off the board one at a time, it's not completely over.
Yeah, is that a complete disregard underneath the second Spell Queller?
Yeah, that's what was just countered.
Yeah, so he could start the dominoes falling if Conley can find some way to get rid of that first Spell Queller, but I think he's going to go for the informational Thought Knot Seer.
Brock casts
Brock's
it,
just gonna cast
knows that
his
if he taps
rebuff.
Conley out, the game's going to be over on his turn.
And that was just Conley wanting to see what else was going on in Brock's hand. He knew he was going to be dead the next turn anyway, and Brock Jones takes down game number 1 from Conley Woods here. Impressively, too, I have to say, the white-blue flash deck, Conley got to do some of the things he wanted to do, right? He got to transgress on turn 2. He got the Wasteland Strangler the next turn to actually kill a creature, and didn't seem to slow Brock down much at all.
Yeah, if you ask me, it was a fairly good showing for both decks. Conley made a game of it and had some really nice turns in the early part of the game, despite being on the draw. But this is really the power of the blue-white flash deck. When you get to win the die roll, be on the play, and have a nice draw, you can almost put it in a situation where it doesn't matter what cards your opponent's casting. You're going to counter them all and win the game quickly either way.
Now, let's jump over to our side table here, where we have Joseph Landweber playing the red-green Aetherworks Marvel deck. It looks like he's got a lot going on. I'll let you parse through how far along he is towards actually activating that thing, Reed, while we take a look at the other side of the battlefield. Jacob Thiessen's playing black-green Delirium aggro. So we have 2 of the top, maybe even 3 most popular decks in Standard facing off. This is something that I expect to see quite a bit of over the course of the weekend here. Are, Aetherworks Marvel decks, blue-white decks, and black-green decks, of different configurations fighting it out.
Those are 3 of the pillars.
Yeah.
So the first thing that jumps out at me is Joseph Landweber is playing the matchup that he wanted to play. This is one of the big reasons to choose an Aetherworks Marvel deck is to get paired against black-green. The black-green deck is not quite fast enough to run you over, and it doesn't have counter spells to interact with your game plan.
Your big haymakers and that kind of thing.
So if these life totals are accurate, that's, I think, puts Joseph in a pretty favorable position. He has the Marvel in play. He has Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot to make sure he can activate it again next turn. And granted, Jacob Thiessen does have a pretty impressive army on the table, and he's taken away big chunks of Joseph's life, but it's just going to take one big hit from the Marvel to put him in a very good position here.
Yeah, it looks like he's on 2 energy at the moment. So he will need to scrap together an additional energy at some point here to get that Marvel activation going in conjunction with the Puzzle Knot, but it doesn't take much.
No.
In fact, he's got it right there with the Vessel. What were you going to say, Reed?
One of the hidden strengths of the Marvel decks is the power, the subtle power of Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot. Not only is it one of the best energy generators, but also gains you 6 life in a deck that usually only needs to buy itself 1 extra turn of time to completely take over the game. You could see Jacob attacking for, 6-7 points of damage per turn, but against an opponent that's gaining 3 or 6 life per turn, it just takes a long time to get that life total to 0.
Yeah, like you said, you need 1 extra turn. 6 is about 1 extra turn here. It's like it matches up pretty nicely for Joseph. And he's going for a Kozilek's Return. Ouch.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that Jacob's not on Delirium. We'll see. Yeah, he wasn't, so oof. That's a big hit to Jacob's game plan there, especially since he didn't have much mana left over. Those Scrap Heap Scroungers are sitting in the graveyard for this turn at least.
Yeah, so we know he'll at least be able to get a creature to crew the copter.
Let's see what he does here. Oh, he's just going to put... Okay, so he actually had some interaction that he could do there, right? Where trigger on the stack kind of stuff.
Well, he would have loved to put some counters on the Smuggler's Copter.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when a trigger like Verdurous Gearhulks goes on the stack, you have to choose your target right away.
I see.
So there's not a window for him to crew before the trigger goes on the stack. He can
Gotcha.
respond to the trigger, but he cannot make the copter into a creature in order to target it.
Yeah, and with no other creatures left over to pre-crew, he instead made an 8/8. A little bit of overcosted there. He used an 8/8 trampler to crew his crew 1 Smuggler's Copter. But now we're in an interesting position here, Reed, right? Joseph sitting there. How close is he to being able to get that Aetherworks Marvel activated?
Well, it looks like he's got 2 energy. It's a little bit off screen at the bottom there,
Yep.
but the Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot alone can get him 4 more because of the 3 that it generates itself and the 1 from the Marvel trigger when a permanent goes to your graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to be able to activate the Marvel probably in Jacob's attack step here. And there's, well, a wide range of things that can happen once he does that.
Now, it looks like Jacob has gone to, I'm assuming, crew the Copter here. Is that what you're seeing, Reed?
Yeah, my guess is he crewed the Copter with the Scrap Heap Scrounger and declared his attack step. Now Joseph wants to activate before the Copter attacks in case he hits something like Harnessed Lightning. He can prevent the loot trigger. Oh, man.
What did he hit? Oh, Emrakul!
He hit the hit, Emrakul the Promised End.
This is one of the hits, though, that he would prefer to have waited, right?
Well,
like, is
normally,
there a chance
yes,
that
but
the
it looks
Gearhulk
like
gets in?
He's reaching for the Kozilek's Return in his graveyard.
Okay.
And that's going to be enough to kill the Copter before it attacks.
The Copter before it attacks, but, what does Jacob do if Joseph says, sure? Does he attack with the Copter and the Verdurous Gearhulk, right? Because that gets interesting, right? Now he gets a 13/13. He gets to gobble up the Gearhulk. But anyway, that's not how it ended up panning out. So no attacks at all from Jacob. And this game's going to continue on. I think we should jump back to our main match, though, Conley Woods versus Brock Jones. I'm assuming that Joseph Landweber is going to be able to finish things off here after hitting the Emrakul.
I think that's the way the wind's blowing in that one.
Yeah, and I really want to see how this one finishes up between Conley and Brock, as Conley's looking to try to force a game 2 here. In the meantime, Copter crashing into each other in the air.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like a fairly similar sequence of early turns as the first game, except this time Conley's on the play. Very important in a matchup like this.
Mm-hmm. Brock was digging for lands with that. He discarded a Reflector Mage from that loot, and he did find a land for his draw step here.
Reflector Mage, a bit of a double-edged sword against Conley's deck, since his creatures are big and sometimes expensive, but they almost all have enters the battlefield abilities. Conspicuously passing with 3 mana open.
And this gets interesting. I think that this is a position that really favors a lot of playtesting. From Conley's perspective, knowing whether, let's just assume that your opponent has a Spell Queller here. Knowing I need to do things or I need to not do things, right, is super important to that. Oh, he's going for a Distended Mindbender. Right, so this is a cast trigger. Disgusting stuff for Conley Woods. Well, he's going to find out about that Spell Queller now.
Yeah. Notably sacrificing Matter Reshaper, so this is just about the best Distended Mindbender you can have on turn 4.
Wow. All right. What is he? Yeah, so the deal with this, Reed, I'll have you explain it, but remember, it's a cast trigger, right? So Distended Mindbender is actually on the stack still rather than on the battlefield.
Right, so with a lot of these big Eldrazi's, including Distended Mindbender, the trigger happens upon casting the spell before it ever comes into play. So Conley has the ability to take away that stasis snare before it can ever even target Distended Mindbender.
You got a Liliana? What is going on
Straight to play, wow.
Unbelievable.
Well, this board looks a bit different than it did.
Conley Woods is a genius.
Yeah.
He's probably asking himself, why did I ever step away from this game? Whoa. Yeah, that is one way to do it.
And since Brock had to respond to the Distended Mindbender by flashing in that Spell Queller, it was perfect for Liliana to tick up and make sure it had 0 power.
In the meantime, Thraben Inspector getting into the red zone, hitting Liliana down to 3. That's not going to be a good long-term game plan, though, for Brock. And his deck just does not look super powerful here. And it looks like a Bearer of Silence here for Conley Woods. Now, he's not going to be super happy just to take out a lowly Thraben Inspector. But, hey, he got something.
Right. Yeah, Bearer of Silence, a very powerful card. Doesn't match up particularly well against Thraben Inspector, but in a game as close as this, just getting anything off the table, allowing Liliana to manage the remaining creatures, it's a good start for Conley. And it is a body for the Distended Mindbender to perhaps come down again next turn.
Ooh, but here we go. Now he's going to start chaining these. This one, he has not elected to pay the extra cost, it seems.
Yeah.
Perhaps he has.
Okay, so similar to the other Eldrazi's, this is a cast trigger.
Right.
And you see his last 2 untapped lands there, both Ruins of Oran Reef.
Yeah, those work with, I think, every creature in his deck. I think they're all either colorless or devoid, making them colorless.
Yeah, that's a very cool land. I'm happy to see it getting some play. It's very powerful, notably not legendary. But this is a big play on Brock's side, too. He responded to the sacrifice ability by flashing in Archangel Avacyn, dropped the Spell Queller, but now Conley's tapped out, and that Avacyn's threatening to transform next turn.
Okay. Well, that could do some serious work, basically knocking out all 3 permanents from Conley Woods.
Yeah, it's going to kill both creatures. And the damage can be redirected to Liliana if he chooses. Yeah. So I like this attack from Conley. I think he would really love to get that Bearer of Silence into the graveyard, because then he can cash in the Liliana, as we mentioned, probably on her way out anyway, get back the Bearer of Silence, and that can kill the Avacyn. But Brock sees through it, I think, and he's not going to block.
Yeah, I think you're right, but that does leave Conley still to get something back here. He's going to get a Matter Reshaper. Like you said, I think he'd prefer to have the Bearer of Silence, but hey, he'll take something.
And there she goes.
That means Conley's going to take 3 rather than Liliana, since he cashed her in ahead of time.
So I think Brock is empty-handed at this. Oh, maybe not. Maybe not. He's just holding his hand off screen. But he's still got some cards, including the Clue on the table.
He is going to need to find an answer for the Purifier here. She's going to knock his life total down to 11 and put him on a relatively quick 2-turn clock. And as you mentioned in Game 1, Reed, you know, Conley doesn't do a great job of blocking in the air.
His one flying creature is Bearer of Silence that can't block.
He can't block anyway. And the rest of them are cards like the ones that we're going to see from him here. Matter Reshapers, Thought-Knot Seers, even Distended Mindbenders. None of these, you know, actively interact here.
Oh, wow. So Void Shatter going to exile the Distended Mindbender. He'll still get both triggers off of the Matter Reshaper and the Mindbender.
Right, which nets him just a Thraben Inspector. Not super exciting there, but really the problem here is in the air. This is a major issue for Conley. What is he going to do? He needs to find another Bearer of Silence ASAP?
That would be his best draw, I think, Bearer of Silence. It's going to be very difficult to race. I mean, Avacyn Purifier hits hard, and also is big enough to dodge a lot of Conley's removal spells, a lot of the black removal spells in general.
I think Conley's dead here. Yeah, that's going to do it. Brock Jones defeats Conley Woods to knock Conley to 1-1 and improve Brock to 2-0 with Blue-White Flash. Things just not quite coming together. Yeah, I have to say, you know, Conley's deck did what it does, right? I mean, even in Game 1 and Game 2, we got a chance to see some of the cool interactions that it has, and that just wasn't enough.
Yeah, we really saw both angles of attack from the Blue-White Flash deck. The first game, got ahead, stayed ahead with the Spell Quellers, easy win. Second game, things were looking bad. Conley was enacting his game plan, had the bigger army, but then it used the power of Archangel Avacyn to snatch victory from the draws of defeat.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, it can't be stated enough. I mean, that card did so much work, right? Killed 3 permanents and then killed Conley.
Killed Conley over the course of 2 or 3 turns.
Yeah, just bang, 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 you're dead. And in fact, by the way, did all of the damage to Conley.
Yes.
20 to 17, and then 6, 12, 18, you're at -1, and that was all she wrote. So let's get back over. Our wild prediction was correct, Reed.
Yep.
Joseph Landweber was able to finish up after hitting the Emrakul off of Aetherworks Marvel. And Jacob is going to now be on the play. Now, you said at the beginning of that match that if you show up with red-green Aetherworks, this is actually what you're hoping for. You want to play against this deck.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're really hoping to play against medium speed decks that don't have counter spells. And that, thankfully, is a pretty wide swath of the format. Black-green Delirium, a few weeks ago, I would have confidently called it the best deck in the format, but the resurgence of Aetherworks Marvel has complicated that a bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna bug you about this Aetherworks stuff throughout the course of the weekend, because I think everybody thought it was gone. It had its one big weekend at the Pro Tour, as a card. It was like, whoa, this is the card. And then it just disappeared. It completely fell off the map, and now all of a sudden it's made a comeback in a kind of a different form here.
It was really beaten into submission, I think, by that blue-white flash deck that we just saw win. Generally, Fast Clock with Spell Quellers is a tough recipe for a deck that's so reliant on one single card. But that's only one deck in the format, and black-green being so popular puts the Marvel deck in a good spot. If you can have a fighting chance against the aggro decks and the flash decks, it's going to be a good deck choice. Despite a mulligan to 6, really good start for Joseph Landweber here.
He's got a serve to the conduit here right off the start, and as you can see, he's already up to 3 energy thanks to the Ether Hub as well. But Jacob's doing his thing as well. He's going to get to attack on turn 3 with the Smuggler's Copter. Can't quite see what he... Oh, it looks like maybe a Gear Hulk that he pitched there. Can't quite see it, but that's
now
all he's got for this turn. Go ahead, Reed.
I should point out, I've been raving about Aetherworks Marvel's good matchup against black-green. Jacob Thiessen has a little bit of a different take, a more aggressive take, which gives him a much better chance of beating the Marvel decks just by having a fast draw like we see here.
Yeah, Jacob's playing 4 Gnarlwood Dryad, 4 Grimflayer, 4 Scrap Heap Scrounger, 4 Mindrack Demon, the Gear Hulks that we saw, to apply maximum pressure, and then, of course, the Copters there as well.
I love the use of Verdurous Gear Hulk, especially as the defensive decks turn more and more towards Ishkana to defend themselves. Just having an 8/8 trample is a way to get through an army of spiders.
Yeah, Ishkana, really annoying for a lot of decks. But when you've got Verdurous Gear Hulks, squash go the spiders.
I like this crisp, clean sequencing by Joseph here. Attunes for a forest, reveals that very same forest to play his game trail.
What do you think about the different artwork on those 2 forests? Super risky play, or does it really matter?
I would be impressed if an opponent was so on the ball as to keep track of something like that. And it looks like Joseph has a system for being really careful to reveal the same forest twice. He just left it on the table, in fact, after he had revealed it to 2 different effects.
Okay. So you'll forgive him this one time?
I'll forgive him, yeah.
All right. In the meantime, Jacob, a little less forgiving. He just played a Transgress the Mind and took away an Aetherworks Marvel from Joseph. So that was a turn late, but he got it in there.
Exactly what Jacob wants to be doing here. Just establish a pretty reasonable clock and then use a well-placed disruptive spell to throw Joseph's game plan off.
So close for Joseph as well. He had a window where if he had that untapped land in conjunction with the conduit, he could have played the Aetherworks Marvel, right? But I'm assuming he didn't have a land, so instead he had to cast the Attune. Brutal.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, because he had the turn 3 Marvel, which would have beat the turn 4 transgress there.
There is a funny dynamic after sideboard, though, and the black-green deck puts you to a tough decision, which is that if you put the Marvel into play, you become vulnerable to something like an Appetite for the Unnatural. But if you keep it in your hand, you're vulnerable to a discard spell, so it's a bit of a guessing game in that sense.
Perhaps Joseph figuring, well, you didn't take it away on turn 2 or turn 3. I guess maybe you don't have a hand disruption spell. Is the idea that you'd like to try to cast it and activate it, like have activation mana or
in a perfect
availably?
world, you'd be able to cast it and activate it in the same turn, because that way you're vulnerable to neither discard nor artifact destruction. I think this is going to be a Harness Lightning trying to take out the Smuggler's Copter.
Seems reasonable. Joseph's now in a position where he needs to buy as much time as he possibly can, try to find another Marvel.
Yeah, and combining the well-placed removal spells with those Woodweaver's Puzzle Knots does a pretty reasonable job of stemming the bleeding, keeping the life total high, buying him as many draw steps as possible.
Now, how at the mercy of his draw step is he? Do they have ways to dig around through their deck to find those Marvels?
He's very much at the mercy of his draw step, but the good news is he has Vessel of Nascency and perhaps some number of Tormenting Voice or Cathartic Reunion type cards as extra draws.
Okay.
And that's not even to mention the powerful mid-range cards like Ishkana or Chandra Torch of Defiance that these red-green Aetherworks Marvel decks sometimes play.
And those just buy him a bunch of extra draw steps by virtue of blocking.
Yeah, it's not completely out of the question that he could just win a fair fight depending on the way the draws match up. But for the most part, the name of the game is buying time, trying to find a Marvel, or get up to enough land to hardcast an Emrakul, which sometimes happens as well.
Doing it the hard way. Well, he found another copy of Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot off the top of his library, so he will continue his march of energy. He's now up to 13.
Yeah, the Puzzle Knot is certainly something, though you have to be a bit worried if you're in Joseph's seat, playing against an opponent who has 4 lands in play and has discarded to Smuggler's Copter voluntarily 2 Verdurous Gearhulks. Like, your hand's got to be pretty good.
No kidding. By the way, I love this. Servant, get in there. Hit the red zone, knock you down to 18, Jacob.
Yeah, why not? You're not going to block with it. Might as well do something.
Yeah, not often you see 2 Gearhulks discarded like that. Would you assume if you were sitting in Joseph's seat that those were just Jacob with a relatively land-light hand and was digging for lands in that case?
That's what I would hope for. Could also be the case that he just has an additional Gearhulk or wanted to fill his graveyard for the purposes of Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Yeah. Well, tell you what, he did have an additional Gearhulk, and he was digging for lands. He actually found that forest off of the loot, discarded a Scrap Heap Scrounger, and now is going to play the Gearhulk. Yowza.
Yeah, so it'll be fun to see how he distributes the counters here. Has to worry about a variety of red burn spells, but also potentially something like Nature's, is it Nature's Claim, the artifact destruction spell? Anyway, worrying about a variety of possible removal spells from Joseph.
All right, now what is this going to do here? Take out both of the Scroungers. All right. So he had gone to put one of the counters on a Scrounger. Is that what we're...
Yeah, so I think Jacob managed that very well, putting enough incentive on Joseph to pull the trigger on the Kozilek's return, but not wasting too many of his counters.
Joseph helping out with the untapping duties there. And we're going to see Scrounger come back. That's going to jump in a helicopter. And now things are starting to get real tight here for Joseph. He's got a ton of energy. He's got 3 life still stored up in that Puzzle Knot, but he's still only going to be able to survive another turn of this.
The black-green aggro deck showing remarkable staying power here, remarkable resilience.
This is great.
The Scrap Heap Scroungers have died repeatedly. They just keep coming back, always ensure the Copter has somebody to crew it.
And Jacob's going to run out. Oh, and there was, that was a big draw step, right? I mean, that was it. He needed to find himself an Aetherworks Marvel or something huge to cast, and he found neither. And Jacob's going to run that up. Yeah, Natural State was the card we were talking about earlier, yes. Right? Yeah, that's one that you'll see, as well as the Appetite for the Unnatural. Well, good news for us. We get a game 3 out of the deal.
Yeah.
Not so good for Joseph, but we'll be selfish.
Yeah, he can't be too disappointed getting to be on the play for the third game in I think at least a favorable matchup, though. As I mentioned, Jacob's deck is a lot more suited for the matchup than the traditional controlling black-green decks are.
It looks very aggressive.
Mm-hmm. The Scroungers definitely pulled their weight in that game.
Mm-hmm. Taking a look at the sideboard here for Jacob. He's got a couple of dead weights. Wouldn't expect to see those in necessarily. He's got 3 Transgress of Mine, which we already did see come in. He's also got a pair of Tireless Trackers, pair of Kalatas, a couple of Plummets, the 2 Appetite for the Unnaturals that we talked about earlier, a Murder, and then an additional Gear Hulk. What are you liking here, Reed? We saw the Transgress of Mines. Got to assume that those Appetites come in as well, right?
Those 2 cards are the natural fits against the Marvel. And then he's probably just going to want to perfect his creature suite to have both as much aggression as possible, but also match up well against Joseph's removal spells.
Curious about the removal spells that Jacob's playing here as well. Because if you look at his main deck, I went through a bunch of his creatures earlier when we were chatting. But, he does also have 4 Grasp of Darkness and a Deadweight in his main deck. Joseph does provide targets, right? We saw the Servant of the Conduit, which can be an important piece of the puzzle for him. Does he even care, to try to leave in removal to kill those type of creatures? Or do you think he's just like, no, we don't need any of this, pedal to the metal mode?
Well, it's certainly an option on the table to keep in some removal spells. I wouldn't fault him if he kept in a small number. But in my opinion, it's not really the battle you want to fight against the Marvel deck.
Okay.
Sure, you can Grasp of Darkness, the Servant of the Conduit, but it's already partially done its job just by the 2 energy it gives when it enters the battlefield. And I think you'd much rather focus on your own clock and the discard spells rather than trying to fight the creatures.
Okay.
I will say that I like Jacob Thiesen's deck and his approach to the matchup. He's not trying to force a bunch of inelegant answers like Lost Legacy and pick the brain into his sideboard. He's really more focusing on his general aggression instead of trying to play a bunch of unwieldy sideboard cards to correct the weakness.
Yeah, and that, of course, is the issue when you play a relatively aggressive deck like this, is that if you want to bring in 3 Transgress of Mine and 2 Appetite for the Unnatural, that's great. But once you start taking out your aggressive creatures for those, things can go awry for you. I mean, how many times have you seen it where your opponent had a hand with a bunch of really good sideboard cards that completely abandoned their base game plan, and they go transgress, kill your thing, and then 8 turns later, they still haven't got you dead yet, and you just draw another Marvel or whatever it is you're looking for and kill them.
Many times I've seen it.
Yeah.
You make a really good point.
Over sideboarding. Mm-hmm. It's a problem. But I agree with you. I think that Jacob's deck looks pretty well set up to not fall for that trap. Taking out some of the spot removal spells for some of these more finely tuned daggers, and then just continuing on with the Narwa, Dryads, Grimflayers, Scroungers, etc. seems really good.
I found that the best approach to playing against these Marvel decks is to try to capitalize on the inherent inconsistencies. They are very reliant on a particular card, of which they only have 4 copies. And sometimes they have to spend a lot of time with the Vessels and the Tormenting Voices in order to set up that card plus the 6 energy. And if you just put on a fast clock, a lot of times it's going to be good enough.
Okay, a lot going on there on turn 1 for Joseph, though all he really did is cast Attune with Ether and go get a mountain. But he had to reveal the forest and then go get a different mountain. So, by the way, there's that card right there on the top of his hand.
Natural State. So he did bring it in to combat the Smuggler's Copters.
Has to be one of the better answers for that card, right?
Yeah,
It's
so efficient.
cheap.
And you can take it out even when it's not a creature, giving you more flexibility.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right, Transgress. Looks like it only has one target here out of the hand of Joseph Landweber.
Now, this actually illustrates the strength of the Marvel deck against discard spells, which is that Vessel of Nascency, you really don't know what that's going to become. You can't take it away with Transgress the Mind, and that could easily represent a Marvel going straight to the hand at the end of the turn, never vulnerable to discard.
Another Servant of the Conduit off the top. Yeah, that hand very, very well set up to get Transgress. The only thing that would have been better, of course, is if he just didn't have a target at all. But usually that hand doesn't look that great anyway. So this looks like to be a very promising start here for Joseph.
Another
Especially
very
if he
cool
can hit that
dynamic
Marvel. Go ahead, dude.
Is that Joseph being on the draw and playing the turn 2 Servant of the Conduit, Jacob may have loved to play a creature on his second turn there, but felt obligated perhaps to cast the Transgress the Mind so that he doesn't give Joseph a window to put the Marvel into play.
It looks like Joseph decided not to play the second copy of Servant. Is that what you're seeing here?
Yeah, and I like the play because he does have to be worried about artifact destruction. So to cast the Vessel and leave it on the battlefield without open mana leaves you a little bit more vulnerable than you necessarily need to be. There's no rush here.
Okay. I think he's maybe even found yet another copy of Servant, although he's hemming and hawing whether to take that or just take the Forest. He did not hit a Marvel, as you can see.
If he does take the Forest, that's probably signaling that he wants to put himself in a position to hardcast an Emrakul a few turns down the road. Not that he has one in his hand, but allowing yourself more very powerful top decks is a great spot to be in against a black-green mid-range deck.
Oh, yeah. That's not tapping for mana.
Yeah, Joseph has signaled that he is not really interested in fighting through the scrap heap scroungers by blocking with his servants, but he'd be fine trading with a Gnarlwood Dryad that's not going to come back and attack him again a few turns down the road.
Yeah, plus he's got another pair of conduits here, so all conduits all the time for Joseph Landweber. This is game 3 here in round 2. And Joseph with plenty of energy, 9 in the bank there, and a little board of 2/2s. He's ready to go.
He's got mana, he's got energy, he's got these ground blockers to delay Jacob's aggression as much as possible. So he's put himself in a position where he's going to have a handful of draw steps to a lot of live cards. I think Jacob's best bet here would be to have a Verdurous Gearhulk to really just put as much power and toughness on the table as quickly as possible and fight through these blockers.
Okay, well, he's going to kick things off by playing a Traverse.
No Delirium yet.
Right, so he can only get a basic. He's going to get a Forest and put it into play immediately, it looks like. Like you said, no Delirium, so the Gnarlwood Dryad, if it attacks, Joseph could just block and trade it off. Which I'm assuming he would at this point.
It seems fairly inevitable that those creatures are going to trade sooner or later.
Yeah. In the meantime, Jacob in the tank here.
I think I see another Transgress the Mind in Jacob's hand, which unfortunately for him is not going to be a very effective card on this board state. It's a great card in the matchup, but this is what can happen is the Marvel deck just wants to get its energy, put its mana into play, and then wait to top deck something. The discard spells can't do anything to break that up.
Mm-hmm. All right, Grimflayer appears. Now let's see if Joseph can find something. He really wants to find either one of his ways to dig through his library or just, hey, an Aetherworks Marvel. He hasn't let us know what he found here.
He's also doing a reasonable job building towards his own Delirium. So Ishkana is a big draw. He's only a few mana off from Emrakul, if he can find that.
I love this, by the way. Conduit beatdown.
Yeah, see how you like it, Jacob.
Yeah.
See what you do when you have to defend your own life total.
Take that. Yeah, and especially that Jacob does not yet have Delirium. That's really the big key here. And it looks like Jacob's going to use one of his Blossoming Defense to just save his Gnarlwood Dryad and eat up one of the servants.
Yeah, I like that play a lot. It's relatively low risk. He's not that broken up about it if Joseph spends a removal spell on the Gnarlwood Dryad.
It was Chandra that he drew, Reed.
Wow, that's a big one.
So that isn't one of his huge payoffs, but that's a nice payoff. How is he going to be able to leverage Chandra here?
Well,
going forward, is he just going to have to use her to pick off some threats, or is he going to keep her around?
Given that he drew the Chandra, I'm a little bit surprised that he made the all-out attack here.
I am too. Usually you see people keep their creatures back to protect their Planeswalker.
Yeah, perhaps he was thrown off by the Blossoming Defenses. His plan might have been, okay, I'll force my opponent to trade off the Dryad. I'll use the Chandra to take care of the Grim Flayer, and I'll have the Natural State to protect Chandra from Scrap Heap Scrounger.
I think you nailed it. That board state looks a lot better than the one that we're seeing right now, and Joseph has now had to change course.
Yeah, as it is, he's not going to be able to protect Chandra unless Jacob falls into the trap of the Natural State, only sends one creature at Chandra. But I think given that he saw it earlier with Transgress the Mind, that's unlikely.
Yeah, so in fact, he's actually going to send the Scrap Heap Scrounger at Joseph, and he's confident that with only one green mana, there's no way for Joseph to deal with the Dryad. So he just sends that.
Yeah,
to
perfectly
finish off
played.
Chandra. Wow, so this is interesting because of all things, Blossoming Defense ended up being kind of a critical turning point there, really throwing the works into to Joseph Landweber's plan. He would have much preferred that other lineup, I think.
One of the big skills in Magic is learning how to use your not so effective cards in the most effective possible way, and I think Jacob did a great job of that, lining up the Blossoming Defenses to take care of a creature when it wasn't going to do much else.
So he draws his card, reshuffles his lands, and starts counting his graveyard. If you're sitting there, are you like 90% that it's Emrakul?
I don't know. I mean, I'm going to wait and see, but
50-50?
I'm not happy if I'm in Jacob's seat.
Especially when he starts tapping all this mana, and there's Emrakul for Joseph Landweber. It looks like he had just enough, using both Servant of the Conduits and all the Delirium he could with all of his lands. Whoa. Man, I really like the position that Jacob was crafting here, but when your opponent gets to play a 13-mana spell, it usually messes that up.
We mentioned it, the ability of the Marvel deck to play off the top, and that's what happened. He bought himself a lot of time. He navigated around the discard spells, and the top of his deck delivered this time. So waste the Transgress the Mind.
Yeah, you can't target yourself with it, right?
You can, although Jacob doesn't have anything
He
that
didn't
costs
have a target?
more than 2. Yeah.
Okay, but you can. All right. So pretty good.
Very good.
He got rid of, in fact, good enough to extend the hand, because with the 13-13 flying Trampler up and no blockers, Jacob had one draw step to find an answer, failed to do so.
It turned out that the Servant beatdowns actually put him in range of a one shot from Emrakul.
You're right. It really did, especially that one turn where he attacked with all three of them, hoping to do that. Great stuff for round 2. We're going to have time walk magic, time shifted stuff, but we got a commercial break lined up for you, so we'll be back in just a few minutes. Please stick with us.